Return of the Mount Hua Sect, Chapter 188. With those skills. One blow. One blow. Tangjan's eyes widened. One hit. Just one hit. Tangjan's gaze turned to Tangho, who had fallen to the floor. How did this happen? Although Tangho was inferior to Tangjan, he was still the son of the family head, and he wasn't at a skill level where an idiot like Jogul could beat him. No, it was a level that any strong martial artist would find hard to overcome. That Tangho had lost consciousness in a single hit and fell in an unsightly way. Was he careless? It had to be that. However, that alone couldn't be the reason that brought upon a situation like this. The skill he possessed, where he aimed for the loopholes in an unsuspecting opponent. Tangjan bit his lip a few times as if he wanted to say something, but eventually went silent. Words didn't mean anything more. Unlike Tangjan, who was trying to hide his expression, Jogul's face was bright. What? How? Tangho was lying on the floor, a direct descendant of the Tang family. For the Jogul of the past, this was a wall he would have never been able to overcome no matter how much he tried. Tangho was like a star in the sky he would always had to look up to. But now, the wall had collapsed. With a face of joy and excitement, Jogul grabbed his sword. At that moment, next! A shrill voice pierced his ears. Let's not look back. Never look back. It was obvious what kind of expressions his Sahyungs were looking at him with. He couldn't turn back and give them gaps to yell at him. So swordsman-like. Look at him pretending to be cool. Look at him. He really needs a good beating. Wasn't this refreshing? It was so warm that sweat was dripping down his back. I shouldn't make eye contact for a while. If he did meet their eyes. Next! He wasn't too bothered with the others, but there was one person he couldn't even glance at during this time. Jogul, who was a bit embarrassed, coughed and raised his sword. Is there no one next? Rather than Tangjan, Tangmyeong, who was there, furiously shouted. How dare you! As Tangmyeong was about to step ahead, a hand encased in a green leather glove blocked his way. Hyung! Tangjan looked at him with cold eyes and said, Stand back. But he is too arrogant. He isn't your opponent. Tangmyeong's eyes widened. It wasn't because he didn't know what the words from Tangjan's mouth meant. Tangmyeong's gaze shifted from Tangjan and he looked at Tangho lying on the ground. There wasn't much difference between him and Tangho, and if Tangho was beaten so easily, it would probably be the same for him as well. Furthermore, Tangjan's words affirmed that it was by no fluke that Jogul could defeat Tangho. Tangmyeong, who bit his lip, walked into the arena without another word, and Tangjan didn't stop him. He went and picked up his fallen sibling and went back to his spot. Stay far away. Yes. Even if he didn't acknowledge Jogul's skills, he couldn't disobey the orders of his Hyung. And even if they were siblings, the position of Tangjan was different. Tangjan took his eyes off Tangmyeong and looked at Jogul and the people of Mount Hua who were behind him with a relaxed expression. My younger brother made a mistake, but I am different from him, so be careful. It was a short conversation with cold words, but hearing him say that filled Jogul's body with strength. Before his mind could understand it, his body had grasped the strength of Tangjan. Is he better than the second-class disciple of Wudang? He had already tried fighting with the second-class disciples of Wudang and had even won against them without much difficulty. However, Tangjan seemed to be a level higher than them. Well, it was impossible to compare the direct lineage of a family such as the Tang family to a sect like Wudang, which trained multiple people at once. To face Tangjan, the Sword Dragon would have to come out in person. The Sword Dragon. If it was Jogul who had dealt with the Sword Dragon that Baekchun had faced then, how strong would it have become? Jogul's heart fluttered in excitement, and at that moment, look at him, look! Look at him shrugging. He must want a beating. That dokebi-like bastard. The irritated voice of Chungmyeong entered his ears. I've said repeatedly not to get so excited in front of others, but why does it still happen? Is his ears made of stone or something that the words just don't stick? Stab. Chungmyeong's words stabbed Jogul in the back. I've told you several times that the person who gets excited the most on the battlefield is the first one to die. Why don't you listen at all? Are you doing this because you really want to die? Then you don't have to die in this way. Just go and stick your nose in a river or something. Why die by someone else's hand? Again, stab. Jogul shook his body. Even if a dagger pierced into his body, it wouldn't have hurt this much. But it wasn't just pain. I must have gone crazy. Am I actually becoming excited about being able to fight an opponent in front of me? Even a child who grabs a sword for the first time wouldn't make such a mistake. My head feels cold, and the chest. My chest needs to be cold too. Mount Hua's martial arts staked everything on the delicacy of the tip of the sword. If a sword couldn't be controlled perfectly, half of its power couldn't be shown. Good, be even colder. Jogul's eyes were turning back to normal. Chungmyeong, who was watching it, nodded his head. I always need to tell him to make him remember. I know how to do it, I know. He had now regained his composure. It was clear that his mind was relieved a little, and it seemed like all the training he did wasn't in vain. Baekchun, who stood behind Chungmyeong, looked at him with a strange gaze. This guy. Baekchun couldn't lead the four of them like Chungmyeong could. He couldn't teach or guide them like this. However, he still thought it would be better for him to take care of them and lead them in the right direction than leave them in the hands of Chungmyeong. But at this moment, Baekchun had no choice but to realize it. Maybe he's the one who's really looking after the Sajils. They wouldn't improve if someone held their hand the whole way. A child would never be able to immerse his feet in water for the rest of his life if the child didn't know what it meant to put his feet in there. He would constantly think that he would fall or break his feet in the water. So, it was better to let people go so that they could learn. Even if he was worried and anxious, he had to trust and let go, because that is how strong people are raised. If Chungmyeong were to come forward, Tangjan wouldn't have been able to withstand even one technique from him. However, instead of the easy method, Chungmyeong was clenching his fist with an anxious heart and looking at his Sahyungs. I am still too far away. Baekchun bit his lip and looked at Jogul's back. He had to believe in his skills and the disciples of Mount Hua. Tangjan looked at Jogul and saw tranquil eyes. Nothing could be guessed from the fame of Jogul, who was aiming his sword. It was an image of shocking concentration. No, maybe it was a kind of selflessness that went beyond concentration. Can I be that focused? No way. At least for now, he couldn't. But Tangjan didn't think he would lose. Concentration meant nothing in front of a stronger force. Grip. The throwing knives were held inside the sleeve and made a terrible sound because of the friction. Crack. Grip. The friction continued to get faster and faster, and it heightened the tension in the atmosphere around them. And then, Tangjan pulled out the weapon inside his sleeve. At the same time, all the throwing knives flew for Jogul with the speed of light. Swish! Something flashed for a moment, and the blades were already close to Jogul. Jogul's eyes shone. Kang kang! Jogul, after striking down 2 blades with his sword, twisted his body. Even he, who was known to have the sharpest sword among the third-class disciples of Mount Hua, failed to strike down all 3 blades. So, he had to twist his body to avoid it. Swish! And then 2 more of the throwing knives flew towards Jogul again. Ta! Jogul, whose body was out of balance, slammed his sword into the floor. And with that recoil, he jumped up in the air and managed to avoid the knives again. Suck! The blades narrowly glided past his head and cut a few strands of his hair. He's strong. In the meantime, Jogul felt thrilled by the skills of his opponent. It was just simple throwing. All he had to do was put strength into a weapon and throw it. However, this technique had been practiced to terrifying perfection, and this was proof of how long this man had trained. A flawless release and blazingly fast speed. more than anything else. 5 more blades came towards Jogul, who fell to the ground. They're linked. As if he had intended for this situation to happen ever since he threw the first 2 throwing knives, Tangjan certainly appeared to be very prepared. The 5 of them moved again and came for Jogul's body. If even a single one pierced his body, it was certain that it would inflict a terrible wound on him, and it wasn't possible for a blade of Tang to not be poisoned. Strong. Tangjan was definitely strong. But, I'm sorry, but, Jogul bit his lip, and he slowly pulled his legs back and kicked into the air with all his might. After gaining speed with the recoil, which radiated ki from his body, he rushed towards the blade. I fight a monster worse than you every day. His fingers clasped onto his sword, and as if his sword had become an extension of his arm. Was his opponent strong? Was he dangerous? What could that even mean? Mount Hua's plum blossoms would bloom even in the rain and the wind. It would bloom even in the coldest blizzard. There was no reason why the plum blossoms wouldn't bloom in any circumstance. A small flower bud formed on the tip of Jogul's sword. Bloom. Bloom. Eventually, the plum blossom was completed, and the flowers bloomed as they covered the flying throwing knives. Kang! Kang kang king! The blade couldn't penetrate the plum blossom and bounced off it. Jogul was about to rush to Tangjan when he had to go still. Goof! The last throwing knife was coming at him with an incredible speed and was even spinning. Just by looking at his opponent's face, he could tell just how much ki was put into this. The 11th throwing knife. He had heard of such a thing in the past, the Tang family's technique. Beware of the 11th one. The last one will take down your soul without you even seeing it. And that last one was coming to pierce Jogul right now. Woom! The blade, which left Tangjan's hand, went towards Jogul. Slowly, very slowly, Jogul looked at the scene with great respect. It was strange that even rain wouldn't fall to the ground at such a slow pace. It was so slow that he felt bad for hitting it. But despite that slow speed, the moment he saw that blade, Jogul felt sweat run down his body. It was coming. He knew that it would surely come. He knew that it was dangerous. It was then. Quah! The blade, which flew slowly, suddenly moved at an explosive speed. It was a speed he couldn't follow with his eyes. And by the time Jogul realized that, it had already arrived right in front of his neck. Jogul! The disciples of Mount Hua were stunned at what they saw. But Jogul didn't waver. Step. 1 foot to the side. Twist. He turned his entire body. Shh! With an eerie sound, Jogul's neck was cut by half an inch and blood spurted from his throat. Jogul's body shook like it would collapse at any moment. Caught him! The moment when Tangjan was about to smile, Jogul swiftly spun his body around and then rushed to Tangjan. Huh? At that moment, what Tangjan saw wasn't Jogul. Plum blossoms. All his vision was covered with plum blossoms, drenched in blood. It was spectacular. A small weight was felt on Tangjan's shoulder. In that place, the plum blossom suddenly disappeared and a person was standing there. Jogul, who was bleeding from his neck, was standing there, and his sword rested on Tangjan's shoulder. Tangjan didn't say anything. Next one. I can't. Jogul smiled and shook his head. Well, this is my victory. Seeing Jogul smile, Tangjan closed his eyes tightly. Defeat. This was a clan defeat.